Hello, this is Michelle at East Ave Art, and today I'm painting this retro nostalgic pumpkin for Halloween. So I start by getting my watercolors activated. You can see that I'm just spraying some water on there, and that just helps to make my paint a little bit more vibrant if you start with the watercolor activated. And I'm gonna mix up a bunch of different shades of orange. So you can see that I mixed up sort of a mid-tone orange. Now I'm going to add a little bit of yellow into that second well and get a lighter color of orange going. And I think that having different shades of your base color helps to make your painting look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to start with the lightest shade of orange that I plan on using, and I kind of used a pretty big brush there, you can see, to just kind of get that paint onto my pumpkin that I had kind of sketched out before this. You can see the light pencil marks that I left there. So I want to start with the lightest color, and then I can build up from there. My main reason for using a bigger paintbrush is I wanted to make sure I could get the paint on here as quickly as possible so that it stays wet, so no part of my pumpkin dries before I start putting in some additional paint colors in here. So you can see I'm adding a little bit more of that true orange color around the exterior of the pumpkin to start with, because those would be sort of like the darker sections right underneath the little hat that I've drawn there. And then the crevices on the pumpkin would also be a little bit darker. There's not as much light hitting there, and the bottom of the pumpkin would be darker. So I wanted to put an initial sort of layer of the sort of orange so that you'd get this very soft blend, that the wet into wet, I've got wet paint going onto still wet paint, and it really creates this kind of soft, realistic blend that I think, I use as the base for the rest of the painting. So I'm going to paint in some of the symbols on the hat while the pumpkin dries somewhat. I do want it to dry a little bit before I move on to my next step there. But I do want to talk about my strategy for this pumpkin. So you can see that I added the darker orange into my yellow-orange base color. And what's significant to point out here is that that orange didn't take over the entirety of the pumpkin. I still want the yellow base color to be there so you can see the highlight, and that creates the highlight and the sort of darker bits around the crevices and underneath the hat gives a sense of 3D, and that there's a light source as well. And when you're working wet into wet, it's just important to be mindful of the amount of paint that you have on your brush relative to how wet the paper is. And that's just something that you have to kind of work on with feel, because the paint will go where the water is, just depending on the wetness there. So again, same concept here as I apply a little bit of a darker, more shadowy orange underneath the brim and in the crevices as well. I'm trying to kind of beef up where I see those shadows, and the paper is still wet in that area, so you can see there's like a little bit of a natural blend. If I feel like it's spreading out too much, you'll notice I'll clean off my brush and kind of dry it a little bit and scrub up the area if I don't want the color to be super dark, or I want to blend it a little bit better. So I kind of add in some color. Then a lot of times I do some, I guess you can call it smudging, where I just take sort of I clean off the brush and I kind of scrub around that color just to get it to kind of blend in a little bit better. And also to achieve that shadow color, I did add a little bit of brown into my pumpkin orange. And so again, I'm trying to have this kind of combination where I add in a little bit of the dark color, but then I go in and scrub around it to make sure that it is blending in well. Although I don't want it too over blended because, you know, the pumpkin, if you look at a pumpkin in person, it's not going to have this very consistent appearance, right? Anything that's sort of natural is going to be a little bit uneven, you know, just by virtue of being a plant. So I've let that pumpkin dry, and you can see I'm adding even a darker color in. So I've got a brown there, and I'm also picking up some purple to paint the hat. I picked purple because I think orange and purple go nicely together. Those are complementary colors, right? Orange and blue are on the opposite ends of the color spectrum. So I thought, you know, purple is kind of close to blue. It'd be a nice combo for this painting. I also feel like the purple is a little bit of a retro vibe. I'm not really sure why I think that, but as somebody that was born in the 80s and was a little kid in the 80s, I think I have some credibility here to say this. So I was really kind of drawing on, you know, my childhood in the 80s, going trick-or-treating and, you know, the Halloween decorations of that era when I planned out this painting. So hopefully it gives that retro vibe to people who experienced it, and, you know, people that didn't experience that era can get a little bit of taste of that style. I'd also like to point out this is a pretty nice brush, even though it is a fairly large one. I think it's like a 12 or a 14 size. I got it from Craftamo, one of their collaborator series, and I think it just has a really nice point to it, even though it is a big brush. So I'm able to get those precise, you can see I'm kind of getting some precise painting in there as well. So I really have to say, not a sponsorship or anything like that. I just really like this brush for this project. You know, I think everybody's different in terms of what they're looking for in their paint brushes. And if you're new to painting, definitely try out different brands and different sizes and see what works with your preferences. I really like to have a paintbrush that comes to a nice point. And so I'm always looking for those kinds of brushes. So anyway, as I'm continuing on with my painting my witch's hat here, I want it to kind of look lumpy and a little bit crooked, like oftentimes witches' hats do. And I think I hopefully achieved that. I also wanted the purple to come through on the little sort of almost like bandana or band that's orange there in the shapes that I picked. So I switched to, as you can see, a smaller brush. I think this is like a 2, and it's a round brush again, which is what I typically paint with. But I really wanted an even more precise pointed end to be able to do that sort of small detail work. And I also decided I wanted to turn this into a jack-o'-lantern. So you see me sketching the jack-o'-lantern like cutouts onto my pumpkin there in pencil. And as I keep working, I'm going to use even a darker brownish orange to again give more of a sense of a shadow. that the hat would be casting on the pumpkin. So obviously at this point, the pumpkin is dry. So whenever I'm adding in shadow color here, I'm also spending some time smudging it out. I don't really like the harsh lines. I don't think that's super natural. So you see me, dipping in quite a bit to my water and then drying off my brush really quickly on the paper towel and smudging it out. And I'll do the same process for the bottom of the pumpkin because obviously, it being sort of a rounded object, the bottom wouldn't really be getting quite as much sunlight either. And I just kind of follow the same process, like I said, for the part of the pumpkin that's under the witch's hat brim. This part I'm not going to narrate too much because it's just over and over. I'm trying to build up the color a little bit, build up the shadows to give my pumpkin a somewhat realistic look. And it's just sort of something I can't really give you my strategy. It's just how it looks to me. And I think that's really up to the individual painter. But I do continue to follow the same process where I'm adding in a little bit of a darker color, but making sure that I smudge it out so that it looks natural. It's not just a harsh line on my painting. Alright, this part I suspect is the fun part when you're carving a pumpkin as well, is, putting on the face and carving out that face. And so I'm just going in with some solid black to show the shadow. One thing as I'm doing that I also should mention is I must not have hit the play button and filmed this part, but you can see I have like almost a shadowy purple to show the underside of the witch's hat that I had painted, I guess, at a point where I wasn't filming. So that part, I think again adds a little bit of realism to my painting, even though it's highly illustrative. And I'm just going to keep painting this face to the pumpkin on, and you can sit back and watch that part. So I'm going to skip over the rest of the face because I think you get the idea with what I was trying to do there. And I was making some decisions about this hat. I thought it looked a little bit flat as only just one solid color. So I re-wet the whole surface there just with clean water. And I dropped in, once it was all wet, I dropped in around the edges a really thick consistency of dark purple. So I mixed in some purple and some indigo to get this dark color, and then I just sort of let the paint do what it was gonna do, but I think it gave it this sort of I don't know, messy and frumpy, uneven, you know, what you would expect kind of a witch's hat to look like. Okay, so I really liked that effect, and I'm just going to let that dry, and I'm going to do the same thing for, I guess that's the brim of the hat. I'm going to take some clean water and re-wet the whole surface and add some more of that purpley indigo color. Tried to be strategic for how I did the brim. I didn't want it all one solid color, so I dropped in the purple and sort of squiggled it around so that it would look a little bit uneven and a little bit worn, which was what I was going for with a witch's hat, something that had this kind of like old worn feel to it. And now I'm getting some white gouache because I wanted to put some highlights in the center of, you know, the eyes of the pumpkin and a little bit around the mouth as well. And I just think that kind of finishes off my painting a little bit. I really like the effect that the white gouache gave to this, just kind of finalizing things. And yeah, I think the last thing I need to do is put in a little bit of shadow to show that the pumpkin isn't just sort of hovering here, that it's actually sitting on something, and it kind of puts it in place in the painting. So I'm just putting a little bit of a gray underneath the pumpkin, and then I'm just gonna smudge out the line, and that should kind of give some finality to my painting. Well, okay, I think I'm gonna call this done. So this was my retro vibes Halloween painting. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you would like to continue to learn watercolor from me, please like and subscribe, and thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it.